at least 2 Republican fake electors testifying to a grand jury in recent weeks, and he's doing it with a deal, giving them limited immunity. You can see the scoop here from CNN, which reports that after a year of dormancy around this electors portion of the investigation, and after related witnesses who've been told to appear before the grand jury with no chance for delay, these moves could signal Jack Smith's investigators are, quote, nearing at least some charging decisions as part of the 2020 probe. Now, that's a big statement because, again, decisions doesn't mean convictions. It doesn't mean indictments. Decisions might mean no charges. And again, if you are a fair and honest prosecutor, you don't begin by saying, hey, we want to get at least 5 or 10 or 50 charges. You follow facts. So those decisions are coming according to this sort of timeline and the sign that immunity deals are being handed out, that they're going forward. And Smith using the immunity is significant because we know a little bit about what went down. Nevada's Republican Party chair, a guy named Michael McDonald, and another official from that state, they just went before the grand jury last week, which suggests they're talking. Now, here is how McDonald, one of these 2 people, described the fraudulent electors plan last year.
It's very simple. There's nothing to hide. I mean, we did what we did on our thing. I hate to say thing, but we did on our event.
Okay, just doing your thing. What you see there is someone who at least seems, well, aware enough of the legal heat to not try to say too much. That's the quote we got out of that kind of walk and talk interview, but who now has lawyers and is figuring out there's a lot of pressure here. Now, remember, the Washington Post has reported on how initially Attorney General Garland's DOJ and FBI was kind of taking a slower approach. Indeed, on some of these plots that were exposed, we've told you about, Rachel Maddow reported on, many people put a light on the fraudulent electors, but whether it was going to be treated as a criminal probe, well, a year went by. And before the special counsel's office got in touch, witnesses in the elector scheme hadn't heard from the FBI in almost a year and thought the case was dead. That was in that Blockbuster Post report that started the week. And what's interesting is how the Post was pulling on those threads. I told you at the time it was a very meticulous piece, advanced our understanding of what's going on in the Jan 6 coup probe, but it also showed how some of these plots, again, off-site. You can do elector fraud, you can lie to the government, you can send in the material to Pence and never personally set foot in the Capitol, how all those things are under Jack Smith's purview, and how he, unlike, say, a year back, seems to be ramping up. There was also the public pressure on all this. And as I mentioned, many outlets have done important work here. We just quoted one new report about this from CNN. We reported on what Washington Post and New York Times have said about this. I mentioned Rachel Maddow, who I have to say was just early on shining a light on this story. And here we've done some legal reports, you may recall, where we go through those several types of plots that surrounded the insurrection, that showed it was more than a riot, but much more of a long-term running conspiracy. And we also try to go to the source and hear from people and sometimes give them a chance to share their side of the story. And it was in that spirit that on this program, you may recall, I'm going to show you a little clip, we heard from a lawyer who is very important in Donald Trump's orbit right now. Indeed, we've had other top lawyers come and go or leave the legal team and talk about him and the power he wields. He's an advisor and attorney, Boris Epshteyn. And when questioned on this program, here is exactly what he said, admitting to part of this very elector plan.
That was part of the process to make sure there were alternate electors for when, as we hoped, the challenges to the seated electors would be heard and would be successful per the 12th Amendment of the Constitution and the Electoral Count Act. Everything that was done illegally by the Trump legal team, according to the rules and under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani.
Little Giuliani shout out for good measure, who has also been identified as someone being currently reviewed on the Jan 6 plots by Jack Smith and his team. Now, what Mr. Epshteyn claims there is a type of legal defense. You'll notice he uses the word alternate, not fraud or fake. He says that this was an alternate in case they would win states, they would try to install them. What Jack Smith is looking at is what happens after the point of no return, when the votes are certified, when the states have submitted them, when the Electoral College is done with them. This is not our first election. This was not the first rodeo, and those dates and deadlines exist for a reason, so that you don't have a brawl on the floor of Congress on January 6th over who actually won. Now, you have real state-certified elector certificates. As I said, we've done this before. That's what that looks like. Now, that's a government-related document. There's an official process. This is part of the long, winding road from your vote all the way to the peaceful transfer of power. Then there were these false ones. And you can see they're just computer printouts. I mean, they're not all of that well done. But if you've ever seen a poorly executed crime or someone selling a handbag that's definitely not a Birkin, it's no defense to say that this was obviously fake. It's just telling on yourself. Now, the legal question here is whether Jack Smith's probe finds that those certificates and how they were submitted to government entities and whether they were part of these other plots rise to a criminal level. I mentioned the path we reported on, and if you're a longtime MSNBC viewer, you may recall this, but here's one of the charts that we drew off the evidence we have at the time of the January 6th committee, where what started in November as lawful, green, you can file a lawsuit, or electors, you can try to recruit them in case you win a state, turns to yellow and maybe red over time. And those elector plots that you see at the top, the second arrow, right there, that false elector plot connects with the other plots because it was what they wanted to strong-arm to Pence. It's the pretext they wanted to use to sabotage President-elect Biden's opportunity to be certified and move into the Oval Office. This is real stuff. And when you get out to the end of the arrow, you're talking about potential fraud, which is chargeable. Now, remember, I gave credit to all the different ways we kept learning about this because when you woke up on January 7th, most of this elector fraud stuff wasn't in the public. The military plot to try to get them to take voting machines, like some banana republic, that wasn't public. A lot of this came out, as you may remember, through the January 6th committee, and they drew the line back to Trump. Jack Smith now has more witnesses, and he's given this partial immunity to get their whole story, which means, as you know from any mafia film, as I always say, when people start turning to save themselves to get immunity, well, the government usually wants something in return. They have to fact check it. There's supposed to be a fair process, but usually it leads to them trying to charge other people. There was also how that committee exposed the person in charge of the entire Republican Party, the RNC chair, talking to Trump. And the calls came in from the White House switchboard with Trump himself contacting her. The question then that she was asked was, did President Trump have anyone else on the line? And McDaniel, that's the RNC chair, says he introduced me to a gentleman named John Eastman. Jack Smith is active. He has a lot more than even the committee has. He has more than these leaks that we're getting on a conditional basis. And he's clearly looking at the elector plot